The scariest kind of evil doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people we trust the most. What if the monster lives with you, sleeps next to you, smiles across the table every night? In a quiet home in Seoul, a woman spent years trapped in fear, controlled, abused, and silenced by the man she once loved. And when she finally tried to escape, what awaited her wasn't freedom. It was something far more brutal. This is a story of obsession, power, and a system that looked away. Today, we uncover the katana murder case. In a quiet residential neighborhood of Hwagokdong, Gangseok, Seoul, South Korea, life was usually peaceful. The streets were calm, the neighbors friendly, and nothing ever seemed out of the ordinary. But on the afternoon of September 3rd, 2021, at exactly 2 p.m., that calm was shattered. "Help me! Somebody please help me!" This scream came from inside an apartment. A woman brutally attacked in her own home. Her father, desperate to save her, tried to get her out, bleeding and terrified. They made it down to the first floor, hoping to escape. But the nightmare followed them. The quiet street outside turned into a horror scene. Neighbors rushed out at the sound of cries, only to find blood spattered across the pavement. And at the center of it all, a man wielding a Japanese katana, a samurai sword once meant for warriors, now used as a murder weapon. His name was only released as Mr. Chang, and the carnage that unfolded that day would become known as the katana incident. Chang had married back in 2004, and shortly after, strange changes began to show. He and his wife, Kim Ga-young, which is not her real name, had 2 daughters. From the outside, they seemed like a normal family. Everyone believed they were just another ordinary household. But behind closed doors, Kim Ga-young was living through a nightmare. Chang was obsessed. He constantly accused her of cheating, installed GPS trackers on her phone, and even planted voice recorders all over the house. It was as if she were a prisoner in her own home. To make things worse, instead of working, Chang quit his job and devoted himself entirely to watching her. He claimed he couldn't feel safe unless he knew where she was at all times. And when money started running low, Chang took things a step further. While their daughters were away at elementary school, he told Kim, "You will just end up cheating if you have too much free time, so go out and make money." As if raising 2 children wasn't enough, she now had to financially support the family too. But the control didn't stop there. Chang began to spend all the money she earned, fearing that if she saved too much, she might try to escape. Later investigations revealed that Chang had also become physically abusive, and it only got worse as time went on. After 2016, his mental condition rapidly deteriorated. He often pulled out a Japanese katana, a gift he'd received at work years earlier, and used it to threaten his wife. Things got so bad that Kim Ga-young once called her father, sobbing, "Dad, please save me." Her father rushed over and tried to reason with Chang, hoping to calm him down. But despite everyone's efforts, the violence only escalated. In May of 2021, just months before the incident, Kim made a desperate decision. She confronted her husband. "I can't take this anymore. I can't live like this." Grabbing only her children's school books, she fled to her parents' home. And in retaliation, Chang immediately cut off all of her access to money. He canceled all her credit cards, believing that eventually when she ran out of cash, she'd have no choice but to come crawling back. And as he expected, without money, Kim's situation grew more and more desperate. But somehow, against all odds, Kim Ga-young managed to find a job. Slowly, she began saving up, not just for her children's education, but for something even more critical. She was determined to divorce her abusive husband. No matter what it took, even if it meant going to court, she was ready. Still, life wasn't easy. Even with a job, money was tight. There wasn't even enough to buy new clothes. And so, after much hesitation, she thought of the children's clothes she had left behind at Chang's house. Then one day, Chang reached out to her. He told her, almost casually, come pick up the kids' clothes. It seemed like a simple request, but something about it felt off. So Kim asked her father to come with her, just in case. When they arrived at the apartment that September afternoon, her instincts were proven right. The lock code had been changed. She couldn't get in. So she called Chang, and this time he gave her the new code without hesitation, almost like he was expecting this to happen exactly as it did. So Kim and her father cautiously stepped inside just to grab some clothes, just the bare essentials for the children. Her father stood near the entrance, uneasy. The air felt strange, heavy. He left the door slightly open. Something told him they might need to leave in a hurry. And just minutes later, they would. Chang, who had already left work using the excuse of a hospital visit, rushed home the moment he knew she was coming. His workplace was nearby, so it didn't take long. As soon as he entered the house, he confronted her. Withdraw the divorce lawsuit now. Kim didn't back down, not after surviving years of obsessive jealousy and abuse. She stood her ground. Why should I? She said. You strangled me that day. Don't lie. He didn't back down too. You lunged at me first. I only pushed you. Why are you telling people I tried to kill you? As his voice rose, sharp with rage, Kim turned to her father and said quietly, Dad, can you record this? And that one sentence, it tipped him over the edge. Chang stormed over to the wardrobe and pulled out what he had hidden there, a Japanese katana, real, razor sharp. Kim's eyes went wide. Dad, the sword, help me! Her father stepped forward in panic. Chang, what are you doing? Stop! But Chang didn't stop. Consumed with fury, he shoved past him and raised the blade. In an interview later, her father recalled the moment with trembling hands. I heard the swooshing sound. My daughter had run into the kitchen, but she had nowhere left to go. She backed into the sink, and then he just stabbed her again and again. She collapsed in his arms. Soaked in her blood, her father carried her out of the house, desperate to save her life. The CCTV outside recorded it all. That was the moment everything broke, forever. Her father desperately tried to stop Chang, but it was too late. The katana had already pierced Kim's stomach. When police arrived at the scene, they were met with Kim Ga-young's father, who had been the first to find her. He was carrying his daughter, severely wounded, trying to get her to safety. In his statement, he recalled speaking to her during those final moments, trying to comfort her while waiting for emergency responders. Despite his efforts, he later told investigators that he knew the injuries were likely fatal. Paramedics arrived shortly after, but the extent of the violence shocked even veteran responders. The scene was described as extremely graphic, and law enforcement officials later confirmed that it was one of the most brutal incidents they had ever encountered. To this day, no images or footage of the crime scene have ever been publicly released, not because of a lack of media coverage, but because the nature of the violence was considered too disturbing for a public broadcast. By the time rescuers arrived, Kim Ga-young was already unconscious from the deep wound. They rushed her to the hospital, but there was nothing anyone could do. The injuries from the katana were too severe. Heartbroken, Kim Ga-young's father could only hold his daughter close and listen to her final words. Even in her last breath, she wasn't thinking about herself. She was thinking about her children. What about my kids? What will happen to them? Those were her last words. After she passed away in her father's arms, police and paramedics searched the house and nearby alleys. Blood stained not just the home, but the entire neighborhood. Neighbors were frozen in shock, too horrified to even step outside. All they could do was listen from a distance as sirens wailed and shouts filled the streets. Meanwhile, Chang didn't even try to flee. He stayed right there at the crime scene, waiting silently until the police arrived. Witnesses said he seemed detached, as if he had given up or was too numb to process what had just happened. Some described it as the emptiness that sometimes follows explosive rage, a dazed confusion where reality still hasn't fully sunk in. Chang was arrested on the spot, caught red-handed. He was charged with murder under Article 250 of the Korean Criminal Code. But one question continued to haunt both investigators and the public. How did Chang even get his hands on a weapon like that? A real Japanese katana, not a replica, not a prop, but a sharpened, deadly blade, had been hidden inside his wardrobe. Under South Korean law, swords like katanas are classified as prohibited weapons. Ordinary citizens aren't allowed to own them unless they have special permits, and even then, strict storage regulations apply. Yet Chang had kept it inside his home, concealed, accessible, and clearly intended for harm. To this day, it remains unclear how he obtained it or how he managed to keep it hidden without anyone noticing. But one thing was certain, he wasn't supposed to have it. And so, in addition to the murder charge, Chang was also charged with illegal possession of a dangerous weapon. Some said this was one more sign that this wasn't a crime of passion or a sudden outburst. No ordinary person would own a sword like that, illegally, and instinctively think to use such an item as a weapon. The fact that he reached for it so readily indicated something chilling. He may have already imagined this exact scenario. Profilers believed it was highly likely that Chang had mentally rehearsed this act long before the day it happened. But Chang reportedly called his younger brother that same day and rambled, "I don't remember anything. I don't know what happened. I just saw the sword, and when I was getting clothes from the closet, somehow..." He was incoherent, disconnected from reality. And the very next day, he even called Kim Ga-young's father. "You should have stopped me, father." Classic blame shifting, a trait often seen in psychopaths, according to experts. As the investigation unfolded, criminal profilers, experts brought in for serious cases like this, took a closer look at Chang, and they noticed something peculiar. His extreme jealousy, or what they call Othello syndrome, wasn't just insecurity, it seemed rooted in delusional thinking. Experts explained that when someone becomes obsessed with controlling every aspect of their partner's life, the failure to maintain that control can trigger violent outbursts. In Chang's case, the inability to fully dominate Kim Ga-young pushed his delusions over the edge and may have been the key factor behind the brutal murder. Profilers concluded that the uncontrollable rage stemming from his shattered need for control was likely the final trigger. There was also another layer: revenge. If the divorce were to go through, Chang would inevitably face property division and a custody battle over the children. Investigators believed that Chang had convinced himself that Kim Ga-young had betrayed him. Feeling cornered by the looming divorce, he resorted to a deadly choice. If he couldn't have control, he would eliminate her. In the end, it was a toxic mix of revenge, rage, and paranoia. Ironically, Chang, the very person who had terrorized Kim for years, seemed completely detached from his own actions. Consumed by delusions, he took a life without even fully grasping what he was doing, at least in his own mind. Naturally, this case received nationwide media coverage. From the very beginning, investigators debated whether Chang should face aggravated punishment. Prosecutors argued that this was far closer to a premeditated murder than a crime of passion. They pointed to the fact that the weapon, a deadly katana, was already hidden in the house, and that the murder occurred immediately after a conversation about the divorce. And as you may already know, the difference between impulsive murder and premeditated murder is massive under Korean law. And so the prosecution formally charged Chang with premeditated murder. During the first trial, Chang's defense claimed it was a crime of impulse. that he had simply snapped in a sudden fit of rage. They even argued that he was temporarily mentally ill and pleaded for leniency, hoping the court would accept diminished responsibility. But the prosecution pushed back hard. They laid out years of documented domestic violence, obsessive jealousy, and most importantly, the fact that Chang retrieved a highly lethal weapon, not something picked up in the heat of the moment. To them, this was intentional, calculated murder. After much deliberation, the court sentenced Chang to 20 years in prison. In the ruling, the judge stated that given the brutal nature of the crime, the unimaginable pain inflicted on the victim, the irreversible impact on her family, a heavy sentence was unavoidable. But Chang wasn't finished. He appealed the verdict, again claiming he was mentally impaired. His legal team submitted psychiatric evaluations to support the argument. Later, psychiatrists confirmed that Chang was suffering from paranoid personality disorder. But the appellate court also pointed out that Chang had a long-standing history of domestic violence, and most importantly, he had prepared the weapon before the attack. All signs pointed toward clear premeditation. So in the end, the 20-year prison term remained in place. Yet, for many, the punishment felt painfully inadequate, considering the brutality of the crime. Kim Ga-young's death didn't just end her life, it shattered the lives of the people she loved. Her father, her family, and especially her young children are now left to carry that pain and trauma for the rest of their lives. Her family's lawyers spoke out, saying Kim had done everything she could to survive. She tried to protect herself, she tried to get away from the violence, but in the end, nothing of it was enough. The lawyer also pointed to a much deeper problem. The system meant to protect women like Kim had failed her. In Korea, it's not easy for victims of domestic violence to get real help. Restraining orders are hard to get, and even when they are issued, they are often not strong enough to keep abusers away. Police sometimes treat abuse as a private family matter, and shelters, there aren't enough of them. And many don't have space for mothers with children. Even getting a divorce or fighting for custody can be slow, painful, and stacked against the victim. Kim had been trying to escape, but she was up against a system that wasn't built to save her in time. Today, her children live without their mother, burdened by a grief far too heavy for their young shoulders. Her father, who did everything he could to save her, will carry the memory of that day for the rest of his life. And as for Chang, he serves his 20-year sentence, but no sentence could ever truly be enough for what was taken. This case reminds us that domestic violence is never just a private matter. It is a social problem, one that requires not only laws, but awareness, compassion, and a collective will to intervene before it's too late. Because behind every tragic headline, there is always a voice that went unheard until it was silenced. That is all for today. Thanks for watching.